everyone. Good morning. Thank you, Leo, so much for that wonderful introduction. I am thrilled to be here to share some insights from Make Work Fair, our new book co-authored with Iris Bennett, around how data specifically can present a competitive advantage to organizations and teams that care about fairness. And I'd like to begin by introducing you, there we go, to Astrid Linder. Here on the left. Astrid is a Swedish engineer and the research director of Sweden's equivalent of our National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. In her own words, Astrid's job is to keep all people in cars as safe as possible. But she realized a few years ago that that wasn't happening because the data told her that even though women drive less than men around the world, they are more likely to get injured in car accidents. And in part, this is because there's some important biological differences between women and men in terms of average height, torso shape, bone density, joint laxity, things like this. But even more importantly, because regulations around the world only require cars to be safety tested using crash test dummies modeled on men's bodies. Now, in her role, Astrid didn't have the power to change these regulations, but she did something she could do. And together with her team, she created the world's first crash test dummy, here on the right, that's modeled on an average woman's body, called the Eva Rid. And after that, other companies, organizations, researchers have been inspired to create even more of these more diverse crash test dummies, including the 5th and 95th percentile of women, crash test dummies modeling pregnant bodies. Car companies have voluntarily started using these in their safety testing, and there's now even movement on the regulatory front, including here in the US, where new regulations have been proposed to actually require all cars to be safety tested on all potential occupants before they are released onto the market. So this is the essence of what making work fair is all about. It's making small changes to the things that you are already doing within your sphere of control, just like Astrid Linder did, to level the playing field for everyone, to make work better for everyone. And in our book, Iris and I present this 3-part framework for how we might think about embedding fairness into our everyday practices. We do it by making fairness count, by making fairness stick, and making fairness normal. So I'm excited to share some stories and examples and research with you on all of these. Let's begin by how to make fairness count, of course, using data. That's exactly what Roz Atkins did. He's the gentleman here on the left. Roz is a career journalist at the BBC based in London, and he cares passionately about the quality of his journalism. And he believes that in order for his journalism to be the highest quality it can be, it needs to be reflective of the world that it's reporting on. However, Roz realized a few years ago that he actually had no data to assess whether he was meeting this aspiration. So, Roz did something unique. He decided to generate the data himself. He was at the time the presenter of a nightly primetime news program on BBC News. So together with his team, at the end of each night's show, they started spending 2 minutes counting by hand using a pen and a post-it note. Okay, how many women and men, how many people did we feature on screen during our 60 minutes on air? And how many of them were women and how many of them were men? Super simple, crude, super fast, but effective. They counted every day, averaged the results over the course of a month, and discovered that they were only at 39% women contributors, so experts that they had invited into the studio to comment on the day's news. That was a lot lower than they thought, so they set themselves a goal of getting to 50-50, and since they had the data on hand, they were able to track their progress on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. And they actually got there within 4 months, and stayed there for years, for as long as the program was on air. But I think what happened next is even more remarkable, because once they had the proof of concept from their own show, from their own work, they then started sharing their approach with other colleagues. Now, Roz and his team didn't have a budget available to incentivize people. They didn't have authority to compel anyone to do anything at the BBC, but they could appeal to their colleagues' shared motivations as journalists. saying, listen, you operate under the same constraints as I do. I know how unpredictable the news is. I know how busy we all are. And we still figured out a way to make our journalism more representative, more high quality. You might wish to use this methodology too. And long story short, today, about 7 years later, more than 750 content creating teams across the BBC globally have joined what has now become known as the 50-50, the Equality Project, and more than 150 external partner organizations, including other media companies, journalism schools, corporations, have joined. It's an inspiring example that one person doing something really simple can ignite a global movement for change. That's an example of how to use data to make fairness count. In other words, treating fairness using the exact same tools that we use to manage our core business, right? Numbers, goals, incentives, accountability, transparency. And it also yields real results. The BBC does continuous audience surveys, and what they found is that 69% of people noticed more women in content. They were more likely to enjoy the content more, especially women, and consume more of it. So if anyone ever wondered if there's a business rationale for fairness, this is the rationale right here. But let me give you another example of making fairness count, and this speaks to the importance of using data also to test the effectiveness of what we do. Ericsson, the global telecommunications company headquartered in Sweden, had looked at their internal data and spotted a gap in internal mobility. So at this company, it's really important for people to cycle through different geographies and divisions and teams in order to advance. But their data told them that men at Ericsson were more likely to do this internal mobility than women. So they had a clear goal of closing that gender gap in internal mobility. They ran an experiment in partnership with researchers, a randomized controlled trial, testing 4 different messages, one of which was the business as usual control, an email that went to employees saying, here's the internal mobility site, please explore these opportunities. Out of the 3 treatment messages, so to speak, only one was effective at closing the gender gap. It was the message that said, you do not have to be 100% qualified to pursue and explore these opportunities. 2 other messages, one of which featured a female senior leader speaking about her own experiences traveling around the company, and another that focused on social norms, essentially saying, join thousands of other colleagues in exploring these opportunities. Those 2 messages actually garnered more interest from men and exacerbated the gender gap in internal mobility. So this is a really important reminder to us that even the best intentioned, data-based, research-backed interventions don't always pan out the way we expect them to. And testing, running experiments, piloting before we roll out something to a whole company is really essential. So that's making fairness count. Making fairness stick is all about making small tweaks to the everyday ways of working, the processes and policies that we already have in place to make them better, more objective, more effective. A great example is the resume. My guess is everyone in the room has a resume, right? How many of yours is presented in this traditional format where you have your experience listed next to the dates for the experience? Almost everybody, right? Because this is just the way we format our resumes. This is just the way we design them. But what does that design make really salient? Really noticeable? Hint, pardon me. I was trying to bring up my fancy, the laser pointer. See how our fictional friend Robert Matthews has his past experience ending in 2003 and the next starting in 2007. Using this format, career gaps become very obvious. And we don't actually have any data to suggest that people with non-continuous work histories are in any way less competent or capable than people without career gaps. However, we have a lot of empirical data, even as recent as from earlier this year, suggesting that employers do penalize applicants with career gaps. They're less likely to get called in for an interview. They're less likely to advance in the hiring process. So our colleagues in the UK ran another large-scale randomized controlled trial with more than 9,000 companies hiring for real roles ranging from customer call center operator to software engineer and financial analyst. And they tested a small tweak to the format of the resume, whereby instead of having the specific dates attached, you just had the total amount of time that you did a job. So junior project manager, 12 years. Project manager, 3 years. It's important to note that in this design, you don't lose any information that's relevant to assessing a candidate's competence or skills, right? All you do is obscure the gaps. And in fact, what this study found was that both women's and men's odds of advancing in the hiring process and getting invited to an interview increased by 15%. Precisely because employers were able to better focus on the skills and qualifications that mattered, and they weren't distracted by the gaps. So this is a really important reminder that no design is neutral. Just because we're doing something a certain way, like formatting our resumes a certain way, doesn't mean that it's the best way, or the way that actually gives everyone an equal opportunity to succeed as their skills and competence would allow them. Let's do another example. This one comes from one of the largest companies, one of the largest employers in Australia. They had looked at their internal data and identified another interesting gap. Among people who applied for leadership positions, internal candidates that weren't selected, men were almost twice as likely as women to reapply for another leadership opening in the future. And from the company's standpoint, they actually wanted to keep these people in the pool because they're already in-house, they're great talent. We couldn't select them for this one leadership opening, but there will be many new leadership openings going forward, and they're highly qualified and promising candidates. So their aspiration was to close the gap. And they partnered with researchers to test a very small tweak to their process. They were already sending out the top 20% of candidates an email that said, "We're sorry you didn't get the job this time. Please reapply. There are many other similar openings in the future." So now they just added one sentence to that email that actually informed people that they were indeed among the top 20%. And here's what happened. You can see here on the left, this is our control condition. So before the intervention, men in the blue bar were about twice as likely compared to women in the red bar to reapply. And then in the middle here, we have the treatment condition. And as you'll see, the gender gap has now closed, in part because more women were likely to reapply for other positions, and in part because men were slightly less likely to reapply. The mechanism of this is currently being validated, but the hypothesis is, as much other research shows, is that being more transparent and reducing ambiguity about where people stand, about how processes operate, is a really powerful way to level the playing field. So for women, hearing that they were in the top 20% of candidates was a signal that it would actually be worthwhile to invest time and effort to reapply for a different position, because you have a realistic chance of actually getting it. It appears that for men, though, it worked the opposite way, because they might have expected that they were already in the top 1% or 5% of candidates, which of course is also true if you're in the top 20, but they interpreted that signal differently and said, maybe it's not worth it if I'm only in the top 20. So data is important. Data never lies. Data tells the tale. That's making fairness stick, making small tweaks to the way we already do things. And finally, how do we make fairness normal? This is all about leveling the playing field through all those informal behaviors and daily interactions that aren't necessarily big formal processes like hiring and promotion, or formal policies around things like flexible work and parental leave, but nonetheless hugely shape how we perceive our everyday work in our environments. So I'll take you to Santander Bank in the UK, where their male employees were asked how many of them supported flexible work. I want you to come up with a quick hypothesis of your own. What percentage of men working at Santander do you think were like, yes, flexible work is amazing? The number often surprises people because it's 99%. Everybody loved flexible work. But here's the kicker. When we then ask these men, okay, so what proportion of your colleagues do you think are supportive? We went down to 2/3. This is an example of a phenomenon called pluralistic ignorance, very prevalent phenomenon, whereby our expectations of what other people believe or think are often miscalibrated. And it turns out between these two factors, what I believe and what I think other people believe, it's the latter that's much more powerful at shaping our behavior. We humans are social animals. We want to belong to the herd. If everybody else is going right, we want to go right as well. We don't want to be the only person going left. So consciously and unconsciously, we're quite attuned to what other people believe. Just like these men at Santander. When a random subset of them was informed that actually many more of your colleagues than you think are also supportive of flexible work, this is going to be socially accepted, guess what happened? They were 62% more likely to take longer parental leaves. 15 percentage point increase. That's a huge real-world effect size. So sometimes making fairness normal is as simple as sharing the actual data about what is going on, what people believe, and allowing that correct calibration to shape people's behavior naturally. Another example comes to us from Novartis, the global pharmaceutical company, that wanted to increase employees' sense of inclusion and psychological safety. I know Amy talked about this a lot yesterday, but of course psychological safety is our willingness to take interpersonal risk without fear of negative consequence, such as by going up against a senior leader or raising an unpopular opinion. Now, inclusion and psychological safety are wonderful concepts, but they can also seem kind of vague in the sense of, if I want to increase these things, where do I even start? What do I do? So what I love about Novartis' approach is that they tackled a very specific, concrete behavior and feature of organizational life, which is the one-on-one meetings occurring regularly between managers and their direct reports. And they tested several different guidelines for managers on how to make these meetings better. And it turns out there was one guideline that was far and away the most effective at both increasing psychological safety and inclusion, but also, surprisingly, at increasing the frequency of these one-on-one meetings. That guideline invited managers to speak less, listen more, and give their direct reports space in the meeting to surface their own needs and aspirations, and then be supportive of them as much as possible. So sometimes such a simple tweak, right? It was important to test and validate first, but such a simple tweak of just asking managers to listen more and allow their employee to guide how the meeting ran was highly effective at creating more of a culture of fairness, a culture of inclusion. And actually, Iris and I write in Make Work Fair, we're behavioral scientists, so granted we're a little bit biased here, but our definition of culture is how we do things around here, what actually happens, how people actually behave. Great simple way of changing that. So I hope what's coming through in all of this loud and clear is that making work fair is not a program, but a way of doing things. All the things that we're already doing, running meetings, writing emails, hiring people, evaluating their performance formally, but also giving feedback to colleagues informally, promoting folks, choosing who should be placed to work on which project, who should make the room reservation or take the notes in the meeting, or who's going to go present the work of the team on behalf of the whole team. It's these everyday work processes that we have to tweak in often simple and quick ways if we want to level the playing field. We don't need to do more training, because more than a half century's worth of research shows that unconscious bias trainings, diversity trainings don't actually change people's behavior. We don't need to invite more speakers in. We don't need to do more networking events or costly and time-consuming leadership training programs that take people away from their everyday work. We can keep people doing their everyday work, but just tweak it a little bit to make it better. I would love to stay in touch. I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I'm putting my email up as well, and I'll be here for most of the day, so would love to connect with you all. Thank you very much, and have a lovely day.